or afternoon, or evening, or 2:42 in the AM. Welcome to week 6 of Civics at Home. Yeah, this is getting a little bit old, is it not? I don't know if you all have gotten out at all, but I have not because we're not supposed to really. Including, I was supposed to get a haircut over spring break and I did not. And now, yeah, let's move on. So for civics, this week would have been an EOC review week, very intensive EOC review week with big packets and questions and going over all kinds of stuff in class. But we're not doing that. The EOC was going to be next week, but now it ain't. So we don't have to worry about the EOC. Here's the thing, as I've said all year long, civics is not just about the EOC. Matter of fact, that's only a little part. That's just to make sure you learn stuff. But the main thing is you learn stuff. And civics is so important, as I've said all year long. Actually, most of my life, really. I'm a little obsessed with this, if you've noticed. But it's really true, because all the stuff about the Constitution and how the government's supposed to work, you are part of we the people. You are, I am, we all are, we the people. We're supposed to be in charge here. The government's supposed to work for us, not us for the government. So we choose our leaders to make sure that happens. That's what civics is all about. Also knowing your rights, knowing what the government can do and can't do, and what rights you have. That's all what civics is really all about. So that's why it's so important that you understand it. EOC or no, this is stuff that should follow you for your whole life. Because, like I've said, it won't be too long before you're voting. You're making these kind of decisions. And our elected leaders right now are making really big decisions right now, actually. Besides just fighting against the coronavirus, how do you reopen things? How do you make sure the economy gets back on its feet? Because everything's shut down. This hasn't happened since at least 1918. And actually, the country's a little bit more shut down now than it was during that big flu pandemic way back 102 years ago. So how do you open things up? It's never been done in the modern world, but we have to do it. So our elected leaders gotta hopefully figure out a good way to do that at the right time, not too early. It's not a lot of decisions. So that is why voting is so important. That is why paying attention to what your government's doing is so important. That's why civics is so important. Thank you. I'll get off my soapbox now, and we'll actually start the civics. This week, we're going to actually go back, talking about the Constitution a bit. Some of this, actually a lot of this is review, but it's stuff that you really need to know. This is the stuff that you really need to carry with you after civics is done for the rest of your life, to be honest. So pay some attention here. All right, so we're going back to the Constitution, and let's sit through that kind of right now. All right, so this is a great quote from Alexander Hamilton there. This is why our Constitution is kind of vague. As I've said, it's the oldest and shortest written Constitution that's still in use right now, anywhere in the world. And that's on purpose. It's being kind of short is an advantage and a disadvantage. Because as Alexander Hamilton said there, not Lin-Manuel Miranda, I mean, he's awesome and all, but the real Alexander Hamilton said this, that the Constitution should consist of only general provisions, which basically means it's vague on purpose. That's because, as he writes right here in big fancy words, you don't know what's going to happen. So if you want it to be permanent, if you want that Constitution to last a long time, you got to make it vague so it can adapt to the times. That's a plus because it can adapt. It's a minus because people argue exactly what does this stuff mean. And all the time that happens. But, I mean, there's pluses and minuses to everything. All right, the actual Constitution. Okay, so on the EOC, you would have to memorize, what the different articles are. The let's eat jelly sandwiches and sushi rolls. You don't have to memorize that, but you should know what's basically in there. It sets up the three branches of government, and then Article 4 talks about the powers of the state. Article 5 talks about how you can amend or change the Constitution. Article 6 says the national government is supreme, and number 7 says how they ratified it way back in, 1790-ish. So that's, you don't have to memorize that, but it's good to know. Here's stuff you do obviously have to know. The three branches of government: executive, judicial, legislative branch. And jumping through each one, the legislative branch, also known as the Congress, that's who makes the laws. That's who sets the taxes. That's who sets the budget. They have the power of the purse about money and such. And don't forget, there are two houses of Congress. You got the House of Representatives, 435 members. States with bigger populations have more members. States with fewer have fewer. In the Senate, it's all the same, per state, 50 states, 2 times 50. There's your math lesson. 100 members in the Senate. And don't forget, a law to be passed has to be passed by both houses of Congress. Right now, that could be a little bit of an issue because there are more Republicans in the Senate than Democrats, and there are more Democrats than Republicans in the House, which makes it hard to pass things. And they're arguing about packages for coronavirus relief and business relief, and packages maybe for states and for hospitals and for people out of work, and just sending $1,200 to most Americans, but not all. All these arguments had to go through both houses of Congress and then signed by the president. So the executive branch is where the president would be, but don't forget there's also the vice president, the cabinet, and a lot of agencies. Some of these agencies you don't hear much about, but you're hearing about them right now, like the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. That is an agency inside the executive branch in charge of disease control, as the name implies. And so those people are pretty busy, and the head of the CDC has been on TV a lot talking about what we should do, and the what's going on with the coronavirus. All these agencies are pretty important. Sometimes they really have to step up and do something, but their job is to execute the laws. Then the Congress passes laws, and the agencies try to make them happen. And the third branch, of course, is the judicial branch. Not only the Supreme Court all sitting there together. That's not good social distancing. Matter of fact, they're supposed to be meeting this time of year in the spring is when they meet. They hear a lot of cases back to back. Lawyers come up and do their arguing in front of the judges and all that such in Washington, D.C. And then they research and they argue amongst themselves. They vote eventually. And in the summer, they release all their decisions. Not this year. They're shut down for now, but starting, I believe, next week, the first week of May, they will start to meet from home. And I really hope they all wear their robes and sit on the sofa and Zoom, because that would be cool. But I don't know if they're going to do that. I think it's going to be just audio, which stinks. So they don't have to wear their robes. They should anyway. It's never been done before, but we are in strange times, and that stuff is going to be carried live on C-SPAN, which has never been done either. The Supreme Court normally, there's audio recordings made, but it's not released in real time. You get it later, but it's going to be played on C-SPAN, and I will be watching. I don't know about you guys, but I'm a little obsessed with these things, as I've said. Don't forget, that's not the only part of the judicial branch. There are many different levels of courts as well. But the Supreme Court is the one that gets a lot of attention, even though there are hundreds of other federal judges. Okay, so the big 5 principles of the Constitution are right there in front of you. Let me just go through them real quick. First one, popular sovereignty. That means the people rule. That's what that means almost literally. The people rule. We the people do it. That goes way back to the Enlightenment. Remember good old John Locke and Rousseau? There they are. They miss you. And their idea is we the people. There's the social contract. That's John Locke's basic idea. Government's supposed to protect your life, liberty, property, all of them natural rights, and you give up some of your freedom so that the government does that. And Rousseau kind of said, well, the people are really in charge. They set up any kind of government they want. We the people. So so that's all about popular sovereignty. The people are in charge. Next one is rule of law, limited government. I love that painting. That's a real old painting. I added the UGG. But the actual painting, that's actually King John signing the Magna Carta. Not happy about it. Back in good old 1215. And that's the idea that the government can't do whatever it wants to do. The government does have limits, only what the people want it to do. That was a new idea back in 1215. That's a pretty basic idea now. Most governments would follow this, but still, not all. Separation of powers. All right, this is a super big one. If you remember, good old, there he is, Baron Montesquieu, said, yeah, you should probably split up the powers of government into 3 was his recommendation, so that nobody gets too powerful. And so, yeah, most governments ever since then have been split up into usually 3. The legislative, executive, and judicial branches, so nobody gets too powerful. The idea of James Madison wrote it down, ambition must be made to counteract ambition, which means you get people who like to be in charge of things, and they're in different branches, so nobody can be totally in charge. They have to work together, or nothing happens. Again, this is a positive and a negative. Positive is nobody gets too powerful. We don't want a king or an emperor or something like that. We want people to vote. We want the people to have the real power. But the negative is, to get things done, they have to agree and compromise. And like I've said a few times this year, in the past few years, like 20, 25 years, that hasn't happened as consistently as it probably should. the branches, different people from different political parties, different ideas, aren't really compromising as much as they probably should for our system. So things don't get done as much. Now, hopefully, they can get past that because things really need to get done right this second. All right, so the separation of powers looks something like this. On the EOC, if you would have had it, we would have really worked to try to tell the difference between separation of powers and checks and balances. Which one is which? To be honest, now that we don't have an EOC, I can tell you, it doesn't really matter. They're really close. If you have both ideas are very similar. On the test, though, they were a little picky about it, but don't worry about it. This diagram here is separation of powers. It shows you who's in each branch. But checks and balances, boom, there he goes into the boards. Do we miss hockey? I miss hockey. Um, is it says exactly how they can stop each other. And they can. There's many ways that one branch can stop another branch from doing something. Again, the advantage is nobody gets too powerful. Disadvantage, there has to be compromise or nothing happens. So this is the classic diagram. Again, you wouldn't have to memorize all this for the EOC, but you really should know the basic stuff here. The legislative branch makes the laws. The president doesn't. Nobody else does. Legislative branch, the Congress, makes the laws, and they're in charge of the money. The executive branch can, they can recommend things, but the president does not make laws. You can veto laws, but legislative branch can overrule them, even though that's very hard to do. So there's some checks right there. Other ones, remember we did that menu simulation long ago with the menu makers and the nutrition inspectors, and I'm forgetting the other one, the head chef. There you go. And the head chef can suggest some ideas, and then the menu makers actually wrote a suggested school menu, but then the head chef could say yes or no to it. And then after they finished arguing and rambling and going back and forth, then the nutrition inspectors took a look and make sure it fits the basic nutrition needs that it was supposed to have. And if it didn't, they could say, "Yeah, I don't like it. Do it again. We throw this out." And that's just kind of like how this happened. If you remember in class, I think every class got to almost finish that activity, making the school menu. And in class, that there was a lot of disagreements. Matter of fact, it was harder to make a school lunch menu, a fake school lunch menu, than to make a real law. So congrats, everybody. You did some good arguing there. Um, but it was true because the menu didn't quite fit what the head chefs wanted, and they always vetoed it. But then usually the menu makers overrode the veto, and then it went to the nutrition expert. And in most classes, they said, you know what, this doesn't really fit the nutrition needs that we said you should have. So they threw out the whole menu. In real life, most people know what the Supreme Court's going to say. There's been a lot of laws. The Constitution isn't all that clear, but there's been many cases since then. So you kind of get a feeling for what's going to be okay and what's not going to be okay. So there's not a big surprise like there was with the menus. And don't forget that the president picks the judges, and then the Senate has to confirm the judges. So those are some checks on the judicial branch. So who gets in there? There are some checks for that. Okay, federalism. We talked about this later in the year. Not so much when we talked about the Constitution, actually. This came later. And this is the idea that different branches, different levels of government do different things. And by levels, I mean you got the national government, the state government, the county government, the city government, the school board. All these are different levels of government that are in charge of different things. All that power is split up. According, though, to the Supremacy Clause, that would be Article 6 of the Constitution, the national government ultimately has the power. So if there's a national law that does not agree with the local law, well, the national law wins. And this diagram, you don't have to memorize this. We looked at this, I think this was January, maybe December, I don't know. It's all a blur. I don't remember what today is. But, and this thing, yeah, this gives us the idea that, like, obviously declaring war, having some kind of talks with another country and all that, that would be a national thing. And the state would be more driver's licenses, a lot of education laws are all state level. And then, of course, there's some local ones too. And some things that everybody does a little bit, like, enforce the law. There's law enforcement officers for all these different levels. All right, so this is the classic quote from Ben Franklin. And I've looked this up and researched this many times, and I'm not sure if it's actually true. But it's a great story. And by the way, that painting of him is when he was younger, when he was actually at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. He was a little older than this, whitish hair, but who am I to judge? But as he was leaving, supposedly, some lady asked him, "Hey, what kind of government did you give us here, Dr. Franklin?" And he says, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it." And that's the key. A republic means that the people vote. is a democracy. The people are in charge, and that's what we set up. And if we pay attention, if we vote intelligently, actually, making sure you know the issues and really know what you're voting for or against, that's what has to be. That's the only way a republic survives. It's so much easier if you have some kind of dictator. It's not easier to live, but it's easier to, deal with civics because you don't have to deal with anything. The dictator makes all the decisions. That's it. Done. But in a democracy, it's messy. Everybody's got to help make the decisions. So you got to get in there and you things. That's why civics is so important. Anyway, thanks for listening. Check your checklist. Make sure you're working through what you need to work through. Have a good one.